Everyone, and welcome to the Reserve Team podcast, your home of everything Australian and New Zealand football. My name is Branson Gibson, and I am your host for this week's special finals episode as we preview the upcoming A-League semi-finals. It's going to be a huge weekend of football, and it's going to be a huge episode. We'll discuss each of the elimination finals and take a look ahead to this week's action, as well as we preview the upcoming semi-finals. We'll have representatives from each team joining us tonight on the episode to give us an in-depth preview at each match. It's going to be a big one. I'm not alone, though, at the start. I am joined, as always, by Sean Matheson in the mixer. How you doing, Shauno?
Yeah, very much looking forward to this week, mate. It's been a good weekend of football. Both, I think, elimination finals were spectacles for different reasons. And we, of course, want to thank everyone that jumped in for our alternative commentary streams over on Twitch as well, of which we were both a part. But yeah, also very excited for this episode as well, because we've got some great guests coming on to represent their teams and their countries and their colours and whatever else. So yeah, very exciting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get into this weekend's upcoming games, let's take a look back at the elimination finals. The first one was the Central Coast Mariners taking on Macarthur FC. The Bulls coming out 2-0 victors over the Mariners in Gosford. Shauno, you and I did the alternative commentary for this one, so we had a good set of eyeballs on it. What did you make of this game, and were you surprised by the result?
Yeah, I was, and I think a lot of people were as well, like looking on the A-League website as we were kind of going through the rosters and team sheets for this upcoming weekend, which at time of recording aren't out yet. A lot of the fans thought that Central Coast might be relatively comfortable in this one with the home ground advantage. I think losing Ollie Bozanic early in the warm-up, like one of their, not necessarily for his playing ability either, but being one of their key leaders, I think was huge. Not getting him out there for the match. So I think a lot of people expected Mariners to maybe present a little bit more than they did. And it felt very much like every decision, every game management strategy that MacArthur employed was the correct decision. And at the same time, there was a lot that the Mariners got wrong throughout the course of that game. I think as the game got longer and longer, the decision to take off Matt Simon was probably a little bit ill-advised for his leadership capabilities. I thought a couple of their players didn't have their best nights and they stayed out there on the park during that period, likely more relating to fitness and everything else. And I think for the Mariners themselves, they were asked questions by that MacArthur defence, particularly after MacArthur scored, particularly in the extra time period, where they really had to come up with a different scenario or a different tactic to try and break them down and get that go-ahead goal that they needed. But they really didn't have an answer for MacArthur's defensive structure. So, yeah, I think we maybe, even in our coverage, understated how good MacArthur were throughout the course of that game and the way that they managed the match. It wasn't the most beautiful free-flowing football game that we're going to see this season, unfortunately. But, that's the way that MacArthur had kind of set up a little bit, and it was super effective. It was exactly what you'd expect from an away team performance, particularly at an elimination final level. So, yeah, a tremendous amount of credit to them for getting through. And for the Mariners, I think they'll even still look back on this season and a third-place regular season finish as being relatively successful based on where they expected their year to go.
Well, definitely, considering that they finished on the bottom last year, to finish third in itself is still a remarkable achievement, and they were on top of the ladder for quite a while as well. So still a very successful year for them, despite losing in the first week of the finals. I think MacArthur, they deserve a lot of credit. They had to overcome quite a few obstacles. Playing away from home in front of a big crowd is, a factor. But then as well, we saw, Benyak came off quite early. They had injuries within the game. Meredith gets sent off as well. So they had to overcome a lot within that game to then go on and so I think they deserve a ton of credit for that. The Mariners, though, for me, I just thought they were just so disappointing. I thought the game was set up very nicely for them. In the first half, they sort of sat back, looked to counter-attack, which is what worked during the regular season. But then they changed things up in the second half. They had more possession and they looked like they were dictating play. And then when Meredith got sent off, you're like, all right, here we go. They've got all the momentum. They've got possession. They're going into extra time. They've got a player advantage. MacArthur had those injuries, as I said before. So, everything was sort of teeing up nicely for the Mariners to run away with it. And then they were just stagnant in extra time. They went behind, and even when they were trailing, it didn't look like they were going to score an equaliser. And of course they didn't, but it just didn't feel inevitable like it sort of did in another game that we're going to talk about in a moment. But I just thought, I was just expecting more from the Mariners. I was expecting more on the line at the end, more desperation, and I just didn't get it, which I thought was a little bit disappointing. I mean, what did you think?
Yeah, look, I'd agree. I think the big challenge that that the Mariners and MacArthur have both had to overcome is that for the Mariners in particular, like their depth in their squad isn't that great. If they lose a couple of key players here or there, I think Bozanic, weirdly enough, from a playing personnel perspective, is one of those people because you can bring in, like a Casella or a Bowman out wide and get Nisbet in the middle. So I thought, like, from what they were trying to do and the way they were trying to play was quite different. But I think what became clear is that the Mariners, because of their lack of depth and because they aren't really ready or able to bring on first team quality players off their bench, there's a lot of unproven youngsters, there's a lot of NPL talent, that when plan A wasn't working, that they didn't necessarily have a plan B in terms of shape, structure, formation. All the changes that they made were effectively like for like changes, positionally speaking. I think Nisbet came on off for Miller. I think Kowal came straight off for Simon in a straight swap. They didn't really try and throw the kitchen sink at it, so to speak. And weirdly, as you've kind of mentioned, when the red card seemed to galvanise MacArthur more than it actually inspired the Mariners to go on with it any further. And it was only, and I'm doing this off memory, so I'm probably going to be wrong, and let us know in the comment section or on Twitter as well, but it took them until like the 80 odd minute to get their first shot on target. And you would think playing at home with 10,000 people there with your back, you'd be able to create more clear-cut chances than that throughout the course of the 90 minutes. But again, that goes down, I think, as a credit to MacArthur, that they limited them to strikes from distance, or they limited them to, long diagonal balls across the pitch that they were trying to hit. So yeah, like it all worked out MacArthur's way, and I think in the end, the better side on the night went through for sure.
Definitely. Well, MacArthur will go on, of course, to face Melbourne City. The other elimination final, though, was Adelaide United taking on Brisbane Roar. It was Adelaide United who got the job done. They won 2-1 thanks to a pair of goals from Tommy Urich. Did you see this result coming as well? I mean, Tommy Urich has had an interesting season. We'll talk more about him later, I'm sure, in the preview section, but 2 great goals from him. And Brisbane unlucky not to get an equaliser in the end. What did you make of this game?
Yeah, this one was definitely the more entertaining of the two contests from a neutral perspective. Again, we were fortunate enough to do commentary and you were doing our sideline reporting during the match. And this was definitely a scenario where both sides were trying to score early goals. I think Adelaide getting off to a good start and going 2-0 up inside 20 minutes, not many people saw coming based on how inconsistent their away form had been. And then in the second half in particular, Brisbane really came out and were a much better side. So they didn't quite get it right. I think and this is where I'll give them credit, of the 4 sides that played last weekend, I think Brisbane made the most tactical changes to both their shape and their formation and their personnel to really try and get back into the game. And I think the 2 subs that they made relatively early on, I think it was Jack Hingett and Alex Parsons came on. Parsons scored immediately. Hingett was quite busy in the second half. And to be fair, Delianoff pulled off a few huge saves for Adelaide. There was a goal line clearance that fell to Golgo Mabratu that he punched into a defender. There were a few different chances that on another day and another bounce of the ball, potentially that does make it 2-2. And at that point, Adelaide hadn't really been attacking for 45 minutes. So if that had gone to extra time, it would have been fascinating to see how that one went out. As far as Juric is concerned, obviously he's had an interesting season. There was a period where I think potentially Adelaide looked better as a side with a more mobile forward in the team, like a Yengi or a Toure brother or whoever else. But he's got himself back fully fit, and big players usually step up on the big occasion, and an elimination final is the perfect time for him to get a double and get himself back on the score sheet. Hopefully he can, from an Adelaide perspective, do it again this weekend and prove himself to be that big game player so that he gets back to being what he was when he left Australia, the Socceroos starting centre forward. And given that we don't have the greatest depth in that position at the moment with the likes of McLaren, Taggart and whoever else, we do need forwards firing on all cylinders as we enter the next Asian Cup cycle, as we enter the next World Cup cycle. And he's something different. There aren't a lot of Tommy Urich type players, those big kind of hulking target men in and around the league at the moment. It is a lot of upwardly mobile poachers and finishers. So yeah, I think from Australian football perspective, we want him to be doing well. And probably for Adelaide fans, they're wishing they had had this version of him for longer points in the season and that he can stay relatively fit. But it sets up a fascinating contest this weekend as they take on the reigning and defending champions.
Yeah, well, his second goal was spectacular. What was it? The blind no-look nutmeg touch and turn, and then burned, I think it was Aldred that he burned past and then blasted it home. It was just a fantastic goal. It's the kind of thing that we wish we saw, even as a neutral, that we saw more of throughout the season, as you said as well. I thought Brisbane did a lot in the second half to deserve an equaliser. As you said, I totally agree. Another day, the ball falls a little bit differently. Some of the chances that they had go in. But I think what we saw from Brisbane in the second half was what I wanted to see from the Mariners. It felt like an equaliser was coming. It felt like they were desperate. You didn't want the game to end. You just wanted to see how it would keep on going. So full credit to Brisbane for that.
Yeah, and we mentioned during our coverage as well, like Tom Aldred came back after not playing for the last kind of 3 weeks into the starting lineup, and he was the guy beaten for both of the goals. You mentioned that nutmeg and touch on halfway. Does a fully fit player recover and make that challenge? Do they get nutmegged in the first place? Kai Truan, I thought, was very unlucky. He'd been excellent over the last month for Brisbane, but making that change, trying to get their captain back out there and their Scottish import as well, like if they hadn't made that adjustment to their starting 11, would Brisbane potentially have not gone 2-0 down in the opening 20 minutes? So, yeah, it was interesting during the week as well. I think Aldred put up on his own social media that he was like unhappy with his performance and he felt he'd let the team down. But he's contracted for another year, as is Jay O'Shea. I think Dan Zarki's the only one off contract for Brisbane. Quite a big chunk of their squad will carry on into next year and a second season under Warren Moon. So I'm sure even for their fans, while they're disappointed to fall in the manner that they did with that home final, they'll be looking back at finishing in the top 6 and potentially with the core to go on and try and finish in a top 4 or top 2 position next year, that they have got that groundwork in there to build on next season.
Definitely, and with the news this week coming out about Alan Staggage as well, I think, the Mariners finished above Brisbane, but I'm not sure if they're trending in the right direction where you do see things on the up for Brisbane Roar as well. But, mate, that's about all we're going to talk about last week's game. We'll mention them a little bit later on as part of the previews, but we are going to jump into our first preview. We're going to be joined by a couple of very special guests as we take a look at the Adelaide United and Sydney FC game right after this. The first game coming up this weekend, we'll see Sydney FC take on Adelaide United. Joining me to preview the big game are two of the Ladies League's finest. Representing Adelaide United, we have Rose Valente. Hello, Rose.
How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for joining us on the Reserve Team podcast. And of course, representing Sydney, we have Michelle Morris. Hello, Michelle.
Hello.
Thanks for jumping on as well. So a big game coming up on Saturday. Sydney FC, of course, taking on Adelaide United on Saturday at 7:05 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time at Jubilee/Kogarah. Rose, this is going to be a huge game, but to start off, we'll take a look back at the elimination final. Of course, it was Adelaide defeating Brisbane. What did you make of that game, and what did you make of Adelaide United's performance away from home?
Adelaide like to do everything the hard way this season, and they like to be difficult for their fans. They like to scrape through to the finals, but they also like to scrape through to the semi-finals as well. So that was some real brilliant stuff. That was some jaw dropping, edge of my seat kind of stuff. Great for the neutral. Absolutely fantastic. Devastating for a Brisbane Roar fan, and absolutely, you know what, not even thrilling, just stressful for an Adelaide United fan. Plain stressful. Those on Twitter at the time would have seen that I called it and are now asking me for the lotto numbers. Sorry, I lost all my bets that day as well because I didn't bet on Tomi Juric, but I definitely asked that Tomi Juric could have the game of his life. And he did, in fact, have it much better than the ACL game back in 2014. I don't care what the Westies say. I think, playing for Adelaide United to go into the A-League finals trumps a ACL tournament, whatever that is. If Adelaide hasn't won it doesn't really matter. So, yeah, good stuff. Good. Tomi Juric, big fan.
So what impressed you the most? I mean, Tomi Juric, he's not been great this season. I think he'd only scored 7 goals leading up to that. 3 of them were penalties in one game. So, big stage, he stepped up, right?
I mean, and in that game, he shouldn't have even scored it, let's be honest. That was the Central Coast Mariners refereeing disaster, which, I think every Adelaide fan did not want to win it. So, I mean, he hasn't played the greatest. Look, he's a big game player. He steps up, and literally exactly when we needed him to step up, he did. So just forget everything I've said about him all season. But yeah, he was definitely my man of the match. Obviously, we were all petrified because Craig Goodwin isn't travelling. He's obviously now not going to play in the finals. He is injured. And then Yengi was out. And so we were a little bit worried where the goals were going to come from. But, I think Mork had a great game as well. He's definitely matured a lot. Was kind of expecting a little bit of shithousery up against Brisbane Roar, his former team. But I was quite impressed with his maturity levels. And yeah, Dobby's was my man. He was good on him. He better step up again this weekend.
That's it. Hopefully, from a Adelaide point of view, he didn't use up all his goals in the one game. Michelle, what did you make of the result? You know, as an outsider, sorry, or a Sydney fan, was there a team that you wanted to play more, Adelaide or Brisbane? And are you surprised that Adelaide won?
I'm a little surprised Adelaide won. I think as a Sydney fan, I think we would hope that Adelaide would beat Brisbane. Brisbane's always tough against Sydney. I don't know what it is, but they do step up against Sydney. So I think it's always fun knowing that we got the team that we wanted. I guess. So yeah, I mean, but I am surprised that Adelaide won. I'm surprised that Tommy Urich scored because, yeah, like you guys have mentioned, he's not been great this season. I think he was one of those signings that everyone was like, wow, like this is incredible. Like he's gonna tear this league apart, and he just flopped. And it's a bit embarrassing for him. But I think it's the result that we wanted. I think that most Sydney fans would be happy having Adelaide, considering our last game against them was what 4-1, 4-1, 4-0. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I don't know at the top of my
Nah,
head. But...
didn't happen. Nah.
Was it Rose 4-1?
Nah. Doesn't sound familiar, Michelle.
Yeah.
I think you need to fact check that.
So Rose, looking at the
Without
game,
crying, Rose.
looking at the game coming up,
BRB.
how much is riding on this game? How much pressure is there on Adelaide, or are you just going in carefree?
Oh, I'm fully confident. I hope the boys are, because I am so confident. I think out of the three teams left, so out of Macarthur, Melbourne City, and Adelaide, I think Adelaide is the one team that can really test Sydney FC. So no matter who they get, so if Sydney FC win, no matter who they get, I think they're going to win regardless, and I think that's it. They got the grand final. But whereas Adelaide can definitely, I mean, we struggle when we go away to Sydney. Yes, we do. But there's something about when we get to finals, and there's something about, as you all see with the FFA Cup, we have this thing about playoff games that we turn into a completely different team. I don't know who they are, but they're very enjoyable to watch, and we rarely see that during the regular season. So yeah, I'm extremely confident.
Well, Michelle, what about your point of view for Sydney FC? How much pressure is there on this game? You said that Adelaide was the opponent that, at least in your opinion, you would prefer to face. Does that add to the pressure? Like if Sydney were to lose a home semi-final to Adelaide, how much is riding on this game?
I think if Sydney loses to Adelaide at home in a semi-final, that's just embarrassing, and we should fold the club at that point.
Wait for you to fold then.
Well, that's funny. Big talk. I think, yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure riding on Sydney. I think Sydney FC is one of those teams where, they have to be in the final. Otherwise, this season is a write-off, and it's not a good season. You've already failed at what you're supposed to do. And I think that just means, yeah, there's just so much pressure riding on it. They have to win this game. They already didn't win Premier's Plate. They were 2 points behind Melbourne City by the end of the season, which was, so close but so far away. And yeah, like I said, I think there's just a lot of pressure riding on this game. I think they have to win, and they know they have to win, but they are without three of their starting players as well. So that's a lot of added pressure to those young boys as well who are stepping in.
Well, I want to talk about that a little bit more. I'm sure we'll talk about it later on with Melbourne City and some of the names that they're missing. But Sydney FC are also missing. Ryan Grant's not there. Andrew Redmayne's not there. Does that alleviate some of the pressure because you haven't got two of those star, or sorry, not necessarily, well, yeah, star, regular starters in your lineup?
They're definitely star players. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but does that
How many other right
alleviate
backs?
the pressure or?
I don't think so. I think it adds pressure to the people who have to step into that role. I think for me, losing Ryan McGowan has probably been one of the biggest losses. He's just such a quality centre back, and he always does what we need him to do. And he loves these kind of these games, and you can really see it that he does. So it's a bit. Yeah, I think there's more pressure for the people who have to step in, especially Heward Bell, who has to come in, who plays NPL, barely gets a run at first grade team, and now he has to step up and play in a semi-final. So yeah, I think there's pressure in a different way. I think it's more pressure on those people who have to step up, especially Palaretre, who everybody seems to just rag on him all the time. And now he has to step up and he has a role to fulfill and he has to do his job.
Fair enough. Rose, looking ahead to this game, you mentioned Craig Woodward's hurt. He's not going to be in the lineup. Tommy Urich stepped up for you last time. Who are going to be the danger players for Adelaide this game? Who do you think is going to be the match winner for Adelaide?
Winner, I'm not too sure. I mean, we know Ryan Grant's nipple isn't going to be the match winner for Sydney FC this time, so glad to see that body part's out. I don't know, to be honest. Like, I'm sure anyone who follows me knows that I'm on the Toure train. I always want to see Al Hassan step up. I don't think he has performed as well as he can perform in the small doses we have seen him this season. He's not a starting player. He comes off the bench. So I really just want to see the FFA Cup Al Hassan Toure that we saw really shine again. Not too sure what that is, if that's, if he's playing in a position that he may not want to be. To be honest, I haven't really given it a second thought. I just keep yelling, "Where's Al Hassan Toure?" So yeah, I'd like to see more involvement from him, to be honest. And again, he knows how to step up when he needs to. I think Jakobsen has been really good for Adelaide, and I think he's quite similar to our Wilkinson. I had a mind blank there. If for Sydney, quite similar as like that solid player that doesn't really get not much recognition, but as in we don't talk about them enough because they rock up, they do their job, and they do a really good job of it. So yeah, I think Jakobsen will be important. Delianov has been brilliant, our goalkeeper, young goalkeeper,
Chrissy's husband,
Chrissy's future husband. She's not even here, and she still got it. For anyone wondering, he's 23 years old. He's Macedonian. He's a goalkeeper. Ticks all the boxes. So we are playing Bubba over here. It is a brilliant keeper. He's done such a good job. He had a fantastic performance against Brisbane Roar as well. So a couple of great saves there, but he's had all round, all season, he's had a good performance. So he might actually just keep Adelaide in it.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned Al Hassan Toure. He hasn't scored a goal yet this season, but no better time to score your first than a semi-final, right? Could be perfect.
Mm-hmm. It might be Al Hassan's nipple we're talking about this time, not right. I forget Brandon's on a delay here.
No, sorry, no, that's it. It's
always.
Yeah, I mean, it just wouldn't be normal if my internet just worked properly. So my apologies for talking over you, Rose. How dare I get in the way of a nipple joke? Come on, Brandon, seriously. Michelle, what about you? Who are going to be the key players for Sydney FC?
Well, I am the number one supporter of Anthony Caceres, or as his name is supposed to be pronounced, Anthony Caceres. Big fan, love him. I think he's stepped up this season like crazy. He's just been such an incredible player this season. I think we were lucky that Luke Bratton didn't cop another yellow card, so he's able to play in this final series, which is great. And I think he and Anthony Caceres just work really well together. They've obviously played together at City, I'm pretty sure, a while back. So they've got a good friendship, good chemistry together, which is great. I think Adam Lafondra, he's done this before. He knows what to do now. So it's good to see him back in our squad and, a reliable goal scorer. But yeah, I don't know. I've been struggling with some of our players up front this season. They just, they're getting it done, but it's sloppy. It's not great. And at times it's a bit worrying. I'm much happy with Costa now moving into the midfield as opposed to playing up front. He's just been much better playing in that position. He now people are starting to get back on the Costa train. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But yeah, I think Anthony Caceres is a very dangerous player at the moment, which is great to see.
Rose, from a team point of view, what are Adelaide United going to need to do to win? What's going to be key for them to getting the result?
Scoring goals, Brian. I think they're going
Good
to
one.
score goals. Uh,
How are they going to do that?
you know what? I think welcome to analysis with Rose. This is what you get. You know what? I think they need to start the game like they started against Brisbane Roar. They started the last game with so much intensity. It was fantastic to watch. If they start off early, don't let Sydney bully them. Just show them we're here. We're here for a good time. And we're going to win. And that's what I think. Because there's been some performances where we've started quite slow and then just never picked up. And as a fan, it's quite worrying when you have a few games like that, because then as you're watching, you're like, oh no, this isn't one of those games. So it was so inspiring to see them just play with so much hunger. So I guess from a fan perspective, it's great to see. But as well, more importantly, if they do start like that, please don't drop off. Please don't just. I know you got 90 minutes. It's hard. I get it. I trained for 30 minutes last night. You know, it was hard work. But you just try and keep it up. And Carl, don't no subs too late. I know Carl's watching right now. Just not too late. None of this like Al Hassan in the 79th minute BS. No, thank you. Any other advice they want to know, please get in contact, because clearly I was on the ball last week.
I do like the personal elements, as if, the players and the coaches are listening and, you're speaking directly to them. I like that. I think that's a good part of the show, something we should incorporate more often. Michelle, for you, so other than obviously scoring more goals than your opponents, what's going to be the key for Sydney FC to be successful on the weekend?
I think the key is to not what's the word, like freak out or to stress. I feel like sometimes when the game's not going the way that they expected it to go, they just play very rushed. Their passes are mistimed or they're overhit. So I think they just need to be calm, make sure they know their game plan, know what they're doing. And very important for, I guess, Luke Bratton and Paolo Retre, both who, they tend to do a lot of careless and reckless tackles. And I think it's important that they need to make sure that they're in control of how they're going, for the ball, and to making sure that they're not going to cop a red card or something, because that's like my biggest fear, is that someone cops a red card and then, we don't have them in the next game. So, I think it's going to be important to just stay calm and to know what they're doing and to play their game the right way, because I know that I think we started gelling very late in the season and started getting much better, and now we've lost 3 players. So their last game against Brisbane, they played pretty well, to be fair, which was great to see, but I'm hoping it's not just a fluke, and that it will keep that morale and everything like that will stay the same, and they can bring that into the semi-final.
Rose, last weekend you had the crystal ball out with your Tommy Urich prediction. What's going to be the final score? What are you predicting is going to happen this weekend?
Go with 3-2 in extra time. So, 3-2 Adelaide. We were saying extra time, which means at full time, I'm going to go with 1-1.
Ooh, goal fest in extra time.
What?
Very nice. I would have liked if you said nil all at full time, then 3-2 in extra time. Why not? 5 goals. Why not?
That is
Michelle,
outrageous.
Michelle, what's your score prediction then?
Oh, I'm very superstitious about this sort of stuff. I refuse to talk about score predictions, because if you put it out into the universe has 2 options. Either they love you and you will be right, or the universe hates you and you're gone. Like, you've ruined it and you've lost the game. You are the reason they lost. This happened to me. I'm not even joking. This happened in the semi-final in 2017-18 season against Melbourne Victory. I said, my friend was like, let's go to a game. She was like, let's go to this club. It's emo night. Like, let's have fun. And I was like, but the semi-finals the same night. And she goes, you can miss one game. And I was like, we're going to lose if I don't go. What happened? We lost. It is my fault that Sydney FC lost to Melbourne Victory in the semi-final.
That's a lot of baggage
So,
to carry around.
I refuse to tell you what you have no idea. This is what I have to live with. This is a struggle.
This
I'm
is
telling
what
you.
I have to live with.
Well,
This is why I had to go to Perth for the grand final. I had to do it because if I went, I knew we would win, and so then we
Sydney
did.
FC is making Michelle bankrupt.
I redeemed myself.
well, see, I mean, the easy fix to that is just don't care if your team doesn't win trophies. So you don't want to put a jinx on Sydney. I'm going to make my prediction. Both my predictions were very wrong last week. So I'm going to put a jinx on Sydney for you. I'm going to say they are going to win comfortably 2-0. So hopefully I've done my bit for the league as a whole. Hopefully that result then doesn't happen. What about you two? You guys are obviously very close friends. Have you got a bet? Is there anything riding on this game?
They're not friends.
Oh.
I'll probably fire Michelle if Sydney beat Adelaide. Actually, we're going shopping on Sunday the next day, so I mean, I don't know. We might go for beers afterwards, maybe. If depends on the result. I mean, who knows? It's not like we're Sydney FC and Western Sydney. But you know, I still don't like Sydney FC.
No one
but
does.
you know, it's to Sydney. Like everyone in the Cove is just like, yeah, but it's just Adelaide. Like no one really. I try to get angry, and they're like, you're just like Adelaide. So it's hard to get like aggressive. But I mean, I hate her on a normal day. So
It's true. She bullies me. This is abuse.
Wow. It's all coming out here.
I wish we had an HR department so I could report her.
We'll get Sean on that. Sean's he's around summer. He was on before. He's back
Sean
on later, so he can be our.
Sean would
official
never go
HR
against
rep.
me.
Wow. Well, there we go. We'll have to ask him about that later on. But are you both going to the game?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Saturday is like semi-final day. I've got my girl Eleni is arriving at midday. We're gonna go for a lovely lunch at the beach. Then we're gonna go to the pub I'm expecting there to be a lot of Adelaide supporters, although now with the COVID stuff, not sure. So yeah, Eleni's freaking out that she's not going to be able to get here. We're all blaming Taryn. So if anyone doesn't know Taryn, she lives in Melbourne. She's one of the TLL girls. She hasn't done much for the last year because she keeps getting stuck in lockdowns. Everywhere she goes seems to have cases every time she goes somewhere, and she is coming to Sydney this weekend. So she couldn't have come in off season. So we are blaming her.
Yeah,
Karen,
well,
it's all your
the
fault.
cases have preceded her, apparently. Well, that does pretty much bring us to an end of the segment here with your predictions. Thank you very much for joining us on the Reserve Team podcast. Enjoy the game. I hope you both have a good time, although that probably won't be possible because one of you will probably have to be sad. But I hope you enjoy it for whatever it's worth. Hopefully the television cameras do not find you looking sad because that's always unfortunate.
Fox Sports will find us. They know how to find us. When it comes to TLL, they're on us. But thank you very much for having us on, Brian.
No worries. And Michelle, thank you as well.
No worries. And also for the Fox Sports thing, let me tell you, when you're in the Cove, like it's not my fault that I'm on TV. Like I'm just in the middle. I'm just there.
Loves being on TV. Her name is Michelle Morris TV. She loves it.
But they're not seeking me out. Like they seek you guys out.
Yes, they are.
I'm just there.
They're definitely seeking you out. They seek Hayley.
Not had a close up on me, so they're not seeking me out.
Unconfirmed rumours as to whether or not
but wait,
Fox Sports may
the
or may not
W
do
League
that.
loves you.
W League
The
does
W
love
League
me.
loves you. The A League loves you. MacArthur Bulls have you on the A League. One of the posts, you're a MacArthur Bulls fan, apparently.
Yeah, I know. It's stupid. It's literally a photo from the Sydney Derby at the SCG. Know exactly what photo it is.
Yeah, well, you're popular, I guess. I guess that's it. Well, thank you very much for joining us, though. Enjoy the game.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Bran. See ya.
Welcome back, Sean. You're back after the Sydney FC Adelaide United preview. Big thank you to Michelle Morris and Rose Valente from the Ladies League joining us on the Reserve Team podcast. We're very humbled by their presence, Sean. Always good to have them on board.
They're trouble, those two girls. They cause trouble everywhere they go, and I think they knew that when they dialed in. But everything they said was accurate, and I think the Adelaide Sydney game on the weekend is going to be a fascinating contest. And hopefully for us as neutrals, maybe with one eye looking towards the grand final, it'll be a pretty decent clash up there in Sydney. So hopefully it all goes well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to see how it unfolds. It's going to be a good one. Speaking of good ones, though, mate, we are going to jump into the Hall of Fame, which is always a good segment, mate. We are going to take a look at our inductee for last week. We had 2 nominations. The first was from Bill. It was the Red Army Young Drummer that was in the active area, of course, for Adelaide United. Not Bill, sorry, but the young drummer went up against Ange Postecoglou's sweaty shirt. Of course, Ange was announced last week as the Celtic manager. In honour of that, I nominated his sweaty shirt that he wore in a game against the UAE in the UAE. We do have the results, mate. Being nominated or successfully being nominated into the Hall of Fame is Ange's sweaty shirt. Yeah, Ange's shirt got 58% of the votes to the Red Army Young Drummers 42%. So Ange, I mean, one of the biggest names in Australian football, you know, his time with South Melbourne, his time with Brisbane, the Victory, the national team, and now he's off to Celtic. But I think that this image of him is possibly the most iconic moment of the lot, despite his other achievements. So Ange's sweaty shirt and Ange in general are now members of the Reserve Team Hall of Fame. So that's very exciting, mate.
Yeah, I mean, literally one of the biggest names in Australian sport. Postecoglou's got nearly every letter of the alphabet in it, but this is basically a mesh top that he's wearing at the moment, that sweat. He will not have to deal with that in the Scottish winter next season, but we wish him all the best over at Celtic as well. But we have nominations this week of our own that we need to try and come up with. Would you like the honours, given that you are now slowly catching me up in terms of overall inductees and the reigning defending champion from last week?
I'll go first. Sure thing. Why not, mate? Well, so in the past couple of weeks, you know, World Cup qualifiers are on. The Socceroos have been in action as well, taking on a number of teams, which has been fun. Been staying up late watching them. I have, of course, wearing a Socceroos shirt in honour of the Socceroos being back in action. This shirt is pretty special as well, though, because as I was watching those games, it reminded me of one of the great Socceroos moments that I actually went back and watched on YouTube, and it fit in with the World Cup qualifying theme. That was the penalty shootout that the Socceroos won against Uruguay to get nominated. Imagine if you got nominated into the World Cup to advance to the World Cup in 2005. So the moment that I am nominating is John Aloisi's penalty. I think that deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. An iconic moment, Simon Hill and Craig Foster on comms at Stadium Australia, full house. It was just an iconic moment. I'm wearing the same kit that John Aloisi famously took off and waved above his head after scoring the winning penalty. An iconic Socceroos moment, mate. It deserves to be in the Reserve Team Hall of Fame. I think it should be in there.
Yeah, look, a worthy moment, but I don't know if we needed to tolerate the 20 years since where John Aloisi is linked to every vacant managerial job that comes up across the A-League. And now apparently Ross is linked with all sorts of jobs at Celtic and Western United and whoever else. So, yeah, there's a double dose of Aloisi's going on around the place. But, yes, a fantastic moment. I do remember it quite well. I was in high school at the time. I did go into a pub to watch that game. It was fantastic. One of my good friends was live at the game. I called him during the celebrations after. Obviously, one of the biggest nights echoing throughout Australian football history. But fantastic. I'm going to go a similar thread, but not necessarily as big a moment, but definitely as big a man. And that is, I'm nominating Harry Sutar's head. When Tim Cahill retired, there was always talk about Tim Cahill's forehead. Now we were going to replace it in terms of our aerial ability within the Socceroos. And one man who was born in Scotland and plays his football out of Stoke has pretty much picked up that mantle entirely on his own. He's got 5 goals now in 6 appearances, all of them with that big forehead of his. And he's proving at a continental level, I guess, to just be an absolute nightmare for any defence to try and mark. So I'm nominating Harry Sutar's forehead to maybe get in as a reserve team. It's not as serious nomination, I guess, as yours is, and it's not as big a moment. But certainly when you go through our recent history and 8 wins from 8 qualifying games in the second stage of the qualification program, a lot of that actually falls on his shoulders. And at the moment, he's got, I think, arguably one of the best goals per game ratios of any Australian player ever. He's at about 0.8 goals per game. So fantastic from the big Scotsman. And hopefully we see more of it over the next coming days, weeks, months. It's great to have the Socceroos back, no matter what games we're talking about.
It is, and my favourite thing was the goal that he scored against Jordan. He didn't even have to jump. He just stood there, and he was taller than the defenders. You know, we talk about Tim Cahill's aerial ability. Suter, he doesn't even get up in the air. He just sort of stands there and gets his head on the ball. So another thing as well is the football in question normally gets asked, can they do it on a rainy night in Stoke? We know that Harry, of course, can. So the question for him is actually not can he do it on a rainy night in Stoke, but can he do it on a hot, sweaty night in Asia? So I think that's, you know, a new phrase that we need to work into our football vocabulary. But Sean, 2 very good nominations. I'm very interested to see how we go. It's been a while since we've gone head to head, mate. So it'll be interesting to see which way the reserve team community leans in voting for these ones. But mate, we are going to jump back into our previews. We do have another one coming up now. We're going to talk about the Macarthur and Melbourne City game right now. Alrighty, next up, we're going to take a look at Sunday's game, which sees the Premiers Melbourne City taking on Macarthur FC. Joining me for this half of the show is Melbourne City fan Sean Matheson and Macarthur FC fan Aloni Grinberg. Hello, gentlemen. How's it going?
Hello.
Yes.
Good to meet you. Nice to meet you, finally.
Aloni, welcome. Thanks for coming on to the Reserve Team podcast. This is your debut.
My debut. That's it. Looking forward to it. Hopefully, I don't say anything foolish.
No, don't worry, mate. I've certainly said enough foolish things on this podcast. We'll be fine. So let's take a look at the game. So Melbourne City are set to take on Macarthur FC on Sunday at 4:05 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. The game has been shifted. It is no longer in Melbourne. It is up in Sydney now at Jubilee, Kogarah Oval, whatever we want to call it. So it'll be an interesting one to see how that plays out. Before we get into this week's game, though, let's take a step back and have a look at the elimination final. It was, of course, Macarthur FC 2-0 winners over the Central Coast Mariners. Aloni, what did you make of that game? What did you make of the performance from Macarthur?
Yeah, hey everyone. It was an interesting game, I thought. I thought first half Mariners were quite dominant, especially in the midfield. They were Orania and the other midfielder. I think it was I can't remember the other guy's name. The captain, whose name escapes me. I think they were quite dominant over Banyat and Orr, especially in the middle. And they were creating a lot of chances, but they were just looking very panicky every time they got to the final third. And it fluffed their lines a couple of times, which is probably to their detriment. I think it evened out after half time, and the red card to Meredith probably changed the game further. But Macarthur, they've shown all year they've got a very strong defense, especially towards the middle with Sissener and Jovanovic, and they managed to get 2 counter goals and win the game, I guess. So I guess it was one of those games that on another day Mariners would have won, but finals football, and that's how the game works sometimes. That Macarthur took their chances, Mariners didn't, and now we're here against Melbourne City. So it was a good game. Yeah.
How nervous were you when Meredith got shown the red card? So I think it was like the 75th minute or so, and I
actually thought, I mean, I might be the only one thinking this, but I thought Macarthur were playing better with 10 men than with 11 men. They really had to force they made a few changes. I think Charles Mwumba, who was excellent all night, got the winning goal, was basically playing a wing back at that point. And it was very hard to penetrate when you have got 10 defenders on the field. So in a way, it was kind of blessing in disguise for them to tighten up that back line, because at that point they were very stretched. And so they basically started playing a 6-man defense, which probably helped them a lot, I thought. It was nerve-wracking, of course, but I thought actually the game kind of changed for Macarthur at that point. And you felt like as the longer the game went on, if Mariners didn't score at any given time, I thought Macarthur were more in the game, and sure enough, that's what happened.
Sorry, mate, my internet keeps cutting in and out. Sorry to speak over the top of you there. Heading into extra time, though, how are you feeling? Because obviously,
Yeah.
you were down a player. It seemed like the Mariners had all the momentum. They had the player advantage. Were you expecting to then go into extra time and come out 2-0 victors?
Not really, no. To be honest, I think everyone was surprised when the goal went in. It was from what I remember, it was a bit of a jammy goal. It was a cross that came in, and the deflection was it that fell into Charles's foot and
Yeah, and then
hit it in.
a header off the bar and it was cleared in.
Yeah,
It did it cross the line, we don't know.
Yeah, it was a bit of a mess, but like it went in. That was a massive surprise. I didn't realize they were going to push that many players forward at that point as well. So that was an interesting step, surprise in the game. But yeah, as I mentioned, I think it kind of showed up the defense the moment Meredith went off. I thought they started really, as I say, all hands were on deck, as I say, and it kind of paid off for them. But as I mentioned, like on another given day, that could have been 2-0 for the Mariners. So got to take your goals, got to take your chances when they come, and on the night, MacArthur did.
Absolutely. Sean, you and I were watching the game. We did commentary on it. What was your outside perspective? Obviously not being a MacArthur fan yourself, what did you make of their performance and the elimination final overall?
Yeah, and shout out to everyone that did that watch along with us over on Twitch. We had a great time with it this weekend, and given that we can't go to the game brand, we might do it all again this coming weekend. But look, it was very impressive. I think at certain points in our coverage, at least, we maybe glossed over a little bit of the fact of how impressive MacArthur were, because we were trying to really see some sense of urgency or some sense of determination from the Mariners that they'd exhibited all season, but we didn't really get in the game on the weekend. So, look, I kind of a little bit contrary to what Aloni said. I think that MacArthur, for me, in the first half were excellent as well. They weren't necessarily designed to be playing a big free-flowing, overlapping style. They were very much trying to get early chances in transition with the likes of Momba, who I thought was fantastic, and Derbyshire really trying to get their results. And then from set pieces, they were really trying to force that issue. I think in the end, even despite the 120 minutes, they still had more of a corner count because Central Coast Flurry came late on. And I think the big credit to give MacArthur is that their game management's so good. Like their experienced heads like Susnar, like Milligan, like Derbyshire, Susueta, who I thought was fantastic even after they went down to 10 men. Like those sort of players are exactly who you need to really see out a game in certain situations. And I think that was the difference maker for me. It wasn't that the Mariners I thought lacked a little bit of creativity and maybe a little bit of drive or variation in trying to go forth and get their own goal. But for me, MacArthur they managed the game better than the Mariners did at various points. The Mariners came back into it in the first bit of the second half, and they definitely had the wind in their sails once MacArthur went down to 10 men, but they just managed it perfectly. They killed the game dead in possession. They really broke down play quite effectively. They effectively played with a 4-4-1 style from that point onward. And then once we got into extra time, once they were fortunate, I think an excellent cross from Franich that you already mentioned, a wonderful finish nearly for Susueta, and it goes down as a Stefan Negro own goal, but Mombois deserves all the credit. I thought they managed the game superbly from that point on, where they were happy to just let Michael Roos chase long balls, and it got them their second goal, and other than that, they weren't really leaving their 18-yard to 25-yard lines. I thought they were very resolute. It was a perfect encapsulation of the performances that you need away from home in the league, and then also that you need in those big game environments like elimination finals. So huge credit to them.
Yeah, they've shown it. They've shown it all the other day. They have players. They know when to sit back and when to go forward as well. So they have shown all the other they can. They've got that. I think it's to do with. I think you're right. They've got a lot of experienced players. Look at their names: Federici, Milligan, Sisania, Jovanovic, Banyat, Susueta, Derbyshire even. These are all players who've played in the highest leagues in Europe and for a long time, especially Banyat, who is a legend in Bilbao, one of the biggest clubs in Spain. So they really have, you can tell that experience, and I think you're right, I think the Mariners kind of lacked that experience towards the end especially. They lacked that composure and that knowing what to do, and there was no one that stood up in MacArthur, especially it's throughout the whole time this year. I remember a game against Sydney FC as well, early in the year when they went down to 10 men as well, and I think it was that they went down to 10 men and they managed. I can't remember exactly who went down to 10 men, but I know there was a red card. I think it was MacArthur, and they still managed to nab a win because their game management is very, very good. I think. I think it's shown this. MacArthur struggle when the game is quite open, when there's a lot of space, when there's a lot of counter attacks in both ways. They showed it the other day against the Phoenix, even though there was nothing riding on the game, when the Phoenix were attacking them and really trying to push the forward. They really struggled. I think they tend to have MacArthur tend to lack pace. especially down back. But once the game is compact and tight, that's where I think they thrive. Which is, we'll probably allude to it later. It's the opposite of how Melbourne City play. So, we're very interesting contrast.
Definitely. Well, taking a look ahead to this weekend's game, Aloni, I'll start with you. How much is riding on this game for MacArthur?
Yeah, I think it's regardless of thinking of it's the grand final game away, but I think it's to build a fan base. I think you need to have a successful season, especially if it's during a period during COVID where the club was started during COVID, which is very unfortunate timing. But I also think it's a momentum thing. Like we saw last year, Western United made the semi-final, and the fact that they played away from home, all the games were in Sydney last year, I think was detrimental to them because it was not lack of connection between their new established fans and the club because they're playing away, even though they made the semi-final, the preliminaries. So I think now, in a way, it's lucky they're playing in Sydney. It will get their fans to the game, and the bullpen will be there, I'm sure. And hopefully, it get people on board for MacArthur who were like either on the fence, they were not sure whether to support them. I think it's an important name I think, regardless if they make the final or not, I think the fact they made prelim in the first season is probably a very healthy thing for them and for the league. And hopefully they get fans on board. This year, I know the average crowd was around 5,000, 5 to 6,000. Fluctuated around that period, but I think they can, if they make the grand final and they win it, which that could happen, it's definitely going to increase their fan base. Which we always want to see successful teams in the league. We don't want a case like the New Zealand Knights or the Fury or Gold Coast. So we want to have successful clubs who are well supported. And so this game I think is important for the league and for themselves.
Yeah, definitely. It, is certainly an opportunity to provide a great springboard for the club. Sean, I want to ask you now, how much is riding on this game for Melbourne City? They have a lot more on the line. Their first piece of A-League silverware in the Premier's plate. How much pressure's on Melbourne City in this one?
Look, I think if you asked me this 24 hours ago, my answer's probably a little bit different because I think the key portion that they would have been aiming for this year was one ACL qualification. I think they look at themselves as being like that top 2 mark is their pass mark for the season. Obviously getting that last season, and I think there's 2 different scenarios with last year and this year. I think getting to the semi-finals, earning that home semi-final, getting to the grand final, kind of cruelly taken away by the lockdown hub that we were in for the final series last year. And then I think this year they really would have been hoping to try and get that top 2 finish to get that home semi-final and push on to potentially get their first home grand final. I think now that we're in the current scenario we are, where Victoria's still coming out of a lockdown period, New South Wales potentially got further cases, news today obviously of the game getting relocated. I think you kind of change and shift all that stuff all the way through. I think there's one portion which is the Socceroos call-ups, which for Curtis Good, for Connor Metcalf, for Jamie McLaren, they 100% deserve, and that was always something that I think we were aware was going to happen at some point throughout the course of the season. And then you add on top of that the fact that we've removed ourselves from the ACL qualification phase or from the group stage out of our control again because we can't do the final series and the ACL group stages at the same time. We had to withdraw. I think now they've relaxed those expectations a little bit, knowing that the games now are like interstate as well, and potentially if we do make a grand final, it may also be interstate pending different lockdown restrictions in different states. So I think they're tapering their expectations effectively. I don't think they'd look at this as being the biggest failure of the season to make it through to the top 2 and to get the first Premier's plate. I don't think they will look back on that fondly. But it will also, I think, for a lot of people, look like a missed opportunity if the top team does go out at the semi-final stage to the team that finished 6th. And that's no disrespect to MacArthur. Like we'll talk about their game management and what we expect from the team as we go through this preview. They are a very, very good side, and I think they are pretty formidable in a finals arena. But I think now that they're at that stage and now that they've got that draw, their expectation will be to go on and make the grand final, or at least that's what I would hope as a City fan sitting there trying to watch it from the sideline.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Taking a bit more of an in-depth look and in-depth preview of the game, Aloni, who are the danger players for MacArthur? And for those people who maybe haven't watched the Bulls too much this season, who do you think is going to be the match winner sort of player for the Bulls?
Yeah. I think there's 3 players that have been very influential this year anyway. I think it's Charles Mwamba, who's been a revelation. I think he was very young player, but he came into the scene, really burst into the scene this year. He was signed in the preseason, I'm pretty sure. Like he was on trial originally and was signed up on a youth contract, but I think he's been fantastic. Very quick player, great technical ability. of course, you've got Banyat and Banyat and Michael Sisaweta in the middle, who Sisaweta's from a City player. I think the most important players though in this team, I think, will be the linchpin really is Derbyshire. If Derbyshire is on like Matt Derbyshire, who played a few years in England. If Matt Derbyshire plays is on like. If he get the supply to him, he will score 9 times out of 10. He had a disallowed goal against the Mariners on the weekend, which was a brilliant finish, absolutely sensational finish. So the question will be more. I think the issue for MacArthur this whole season is rather the finishing ability, but if they can supply the ball to him, if they have enough supply, because he can finish and he will definitely hurt you if you give him space. So it will really come. I think in the end of the day, it will come from those midfield core players of Banya, Thomas, or if he starts Sisaweta, Mwumba. If they can get creativity and they can get supply to him, then I think it will go a long way to winning this game. Backline, it's very settled. I think from my understanding is that Meredith will be suspended, so I think Frenic will come in for him. And they have a back three of Sisane and Jovanovic as well in the back three. I think Poyo, look at Loic Poyo, the Frenchman, is coming back from suspension. He didn't play on the last weekend, so he's influential as well. But I think, that midfield, if they can get clicking and find Derbyshire in good positions, I think it will go a long way. Especially now that Curtis Good is not playing for Melbourne City, who's been brilliant this year.
Yeah, the other thing with Matt Derbyshire as well is he's sort of flown under the radar a little bit. He was the league's second highest goal scorer. He scored 14 goals, but sometimes it's sort of a little bit glossed over there, but it's going to be fascinating to see how those players can go. Sean, the same question for you, mate. Who are going to be the danger players for Melbourne City, and who's going to have to step up and be the match winner? You already mentioned, McLaren gone, Good gone, Metcalf gone. Who's going to have to step up?
Yeah, I'm approaching it a little bit differently to Aloni, and maybe I've answered this question incorrectly as to like who's the danger man or who are the most important players for MacArthur. I think Derbyshire is clearly their goal threat, and that makes sense. And I think Benyat and I think Sisaweta are both obviously quality on the ball. But the big challenge for me, from a City perspective, is that we have had difficulty breaking defences down while Jamie McLaren's been away, while Naboot's been injured, while Noon's been out. So for me, it's at the back where I think that key battle, and really if we can get any ground and traction there is going to be huge. The midfield configuration for MacArthur will be fascinating. They did play Milligan and Martis as the starting base midfielders, and then once they went down to 10, they dropped Milligan back into defence and moved McGing out to a wide area. Franic came off for a little bit. So there were a couple of different ways that they set themselves up. I would expect, I think maybe not Franic and maybe Golek comes on for Meredith as that left-sided central defender. And I view like kind of Federici and Milligan as being really key to MacArthur's hopes in this match as well. For Milligan, it's potentially his last game. He's retiring at the end of this final series. I think Federici has been understated as arguably the best goalkeeper in the A-League this season. I think if they're having a strong game and they're dealing with the multifaceted City threats that they can present throughout the course of a game, if MacArthur defends the way it did in the second half and in the extra time period against the Central Coast Mariners, and City's having that difficult a time breaking them down, that's where the game will be won and lost. It'll be down to individual errors. It'll be down to how well they patrol that back line. The two sides have played a couple of different times throughout the course of this season. There was an away game, a 1-1 draw, where it took a Connor Metcalf cracker for us to actually get something, and there was an error as well from Karen Stokes that led to the MacArthur equaliser, and that was a very tightly contested affair. There weren't a great deal of opportunities, and I'd expect, regardless of where the game's being played, MacArthur to operate kind of similarly to that, where they will set up with a very deep defensive block, and the challenge will be can Melbourne City break down MacArthur, and can then MacArthur in transition try and get the likes of Mombois and Roosh when he comes on, and Derbyshire out early in transition against not the preferred back two for Melbourne City. So yeah, look, for me, I think Milligan and Federici are the big two that we have to keep an eye on. If they have big games, then there's no reason that MacArthur can't snag something similar to what they did against the Mariners.
Yeah.
Well, for Melbourne City, though, Sean, who's going to score the goals? So Jamie McLaren obviously isn't there. Who's going to put the ball in the back of the net?
Yeah, huge question. So we don't quite know at the moment, at time of recording at least, unless it's coming out while we're recording, which is always the way when we record this podcast. We don't quite know exactly what the confirmed squads are. Craig Noon has been rested for the last 2 weeks. I think he's going to be huge if he can actually get out there on the park. Funnily enough, has just recently been rumoured that he has signed for MacArthur next season. I think Marco Tilio's been excellent over the last few weeks, and probably frustrated that he's playing sometimes sometimes as a number 9, sometimes in wide positions, sometimes as an attacking midfielder at the 10 role. And then Andrew Naboot, we're not quite sure on either. So I think I'd be very surprised if Naboot gets back out there. But I think of Noon, Kolakovsky and Tilio, there's huge expectation that falls on Craig Noon's shoulders as the most experienced player in that front three and a player who's arguably had his best season in the A-League to date with the goals and assist contributions that he's had this year. So, yeah, I think that's that front three and trying to get them clicking and ticking over and creating chances is really where City's going to have the most success. And then the rest of the pitch is just about winning those individual battles in wide areas or in central locations in the midfield. So it should be a fascinating contest. City haven't been scoring as freely as they were all season over the last kind of 2 or 3 weeks. So if they can get that portion working for them again, and if the reintroduction of Craig Noon allows them to do that, I think that's their best route to go.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think the games now the games in Sydney, I think Macarthur have a bit of chance. I was watching them against the City in Melbourne couple of months ago now. I think it was middle of the year and around February. They were absolutely dreadful. I don't think they created one. They had one shot on goal, and they do struggle, especially away from home. They won the other week, but they tend to struggle away from the Sydney or New South Wales, and so I think it actually finally, I think it plays in their hands the game. They don't like to travel, and they've shown it this year. They've lost, I think, most of the away games. I have to double check that, but they've only won, I think, 2 away games all year outside of New South Wales, which is a pretty dreadful record, I think. So it'll be interesting. I think it's soon between Golek and Franjic. Golek's an interesting one. Every time he comes on the field, Milicic, the coach, he just yells at him nonstop. But he does seem to be out of position a lot. Like he just tends to drift out of position. So, and Franjic hasn't played the last couple of games either. So I'm not sure if he's in the injury crowd or just a positional or tactical reason. But you're right. I think Golek might start in front of Franjic for them the game. But we'll see what happens in that regard.
Sorry, Aloni, what are going to be the keys for Macarthur to win? What's going to have to go their way? What are they going to have to do to get the result?
I think keep on defending as well as they have. I think they've shown they're very patient, especially when it comes to position. They're very patient position-wise, and they'll eventually get their chances, I think. I think City's defense this year, I haven't seen as many games as my friend here, but their defense isn't being the strongest point, especially now that Good is gone. So I think the chances will come. I think they will definitely have chances fall their way. I think it's just if they can hold out the back and make sure that the front three of Sydney's quiet, I think that they can stand a chance. That's what I think anyway. I mean, from Melbourne City's record here, they score a lot, but they don't seem to keep a lot of clean sheets either. So I think chances are they will get chances, especially now that Good is out in Socceroo duty.
Sean, what about you, mate? What are going to be the keys for Melbourne City to win? What are they going to have to do right to go out and get the right result here for them?
Look, I think the big one is patience. I don't expect, and I could be wrong, and Milicic is going to throw a spanner in the works for everyone, but I don't think Macarthur are going to be super enterprising in this game. I think they're very much going to be set up with a defensive first mentality, regardless of whether it's getting played. And what will be key for them is how quickly they can get out in transition. And we've mentioned Curtis Good quite a few times, but he has been excellent. Is arguably the most upwardly mobile of our defensive unit. So with Griffiths, potentially, if he's overcome his knock and Nuno Raish back there, I think they'll be trying to get the likes of Mombois and Derbyshire at them in transition. But I think for City, they need to vary from the off, set the tempo and set the intensity to really try and make that backline work and create as much space in behind. I think if Macarthur, similar to what they did against the Mariners, can get themselves a lead, they are arguably, of the teams still in the final 4 available, the best at defending leads like that. And I think they're the best set up to actually go on and really get something and get a good result out of the game from a winning position. So that'll be the big challenge for them. Driving that intensity, driving the possession, just doing what they've done effectively all season, but making sure that there isn't any respite for that Macarthur defensive line to get themselves back into shape and get themselves into a comfortable rhythm. What we saw in the Mariners game, Branson, and we commented on it, is that Mariners didn't really have that sense of urgency that we expected for them to try and force a goal, and they were just continually playing the same kind of plays and balls into the box over and over again rather than really rolling the dice. I think City is arguably the best attacking group in the competition at the moment with that final 4 teams, and has been throughout the course of the year. If they can get into their kind of top gears and playing their best brands of football with the additional week off and with hopefully a few extra bodies coming back into the squad, I think that's where they'll be looking at trying to drive that success. The forward battle and the defensive battle for MacArthur is where this game will be won and lost.
Yeah, we have seen it this year with MacArthur a few times. If they concede early, or they tend to concede a few quick goals in a row as well. Like,
yeah,
once they concede.
I believe the game in Melbourne, it was 3-0 at halftime for Melbourne City and MacArthur, and that was very much a floodgates type scenario. And I think if City do get something early and that forces MacArthur to then come out and have to try and chase a goal to stay in the game, that actually plays even further into City's stands. So if it is an open free-flowing game, Melbourne City should win this one comfortably, but MacArthur are very difficult to break down. We saw them do it with 10 men for upwards of 45 minutes over on the weekend, so they can absolutely get it done this weekend as well.
That's the thing, is that if City did what the Mariners did, and I think a few other teams beforehand, is that launch these crosses into the box, Cisse now and Jovanovic are just going to eat them up all day. It's their bread and butter, really. That's what they live for. So they're quite hard to, especially they tend to be breaking down when the ball is played on the ground as well. A lot of the goals they've considered this year has been low crosses or low passes in the box. I think the Phoenix showing that last week when they scored like 3 goals on them. So, and City play like that. Their playing style is very much, ball on the ground, pass and move, quick movement, which probably, and MacArthur, the backline especially with Sisson and Giovanni, they're not very fast. So the way you can get behind them, chances that you will score, but I would avoid playing those long lobbing cross into the middle, especially when you've got 2 giants in the middle and the centre backs. They're very hard to get past.
Yeah,
It'll be interesting.
And to be honest, I don't think that's really sets up, even with McLaren in the squad, City's not really like a long ball diagonal type team. I think there's a very different prospect, the way that you set up to defend against the likes of Matt Simon and Alu Kowal and Marco Urania, as the Mariners did on the weekend, and what we expect out of that City front 3, regardless of who that actually ends up being. So, yeah, I think it'll be a different contest to what we saw at the weekend, but it should be a fascinating battle and really contrasting styles heading into the match.
Wouldn't surprise me if City have 108% possession of the game, of the ball.
All right, guys. We're nearing the end here, so it's prediction time. Alani, what's going to be the final score? What are you predicting, mate?
I hope MacArthur win. I think it'll be 2-1 City, though. I think they've been too good of a form to let this one slip. But I've cursed it. I've cursed it now. But I think they have shown...
Mate, I was going to say, bias is welcome here. I'm not looking to MacArthur. That's totally fine.
I don't know. Listen, my heart says that they will win a scrappy 1-0 and get a headed goal in like the 10th minute and defend for the rest of the 80 minutes. It wouldn't surprise me if that happened either. But I think City will win.
So I'm still if Griffiths and Noon start and we do get some of those players back in the team, I think Naboot's done. I don't think he's going to play, based on his reaction to his injury and the fact that he just worked himself back in to his first start for the Newcastle game and didn't make it through. I think it'd be incredible if he gets back in the lineup in any regard, whether off the bench or whatever else. I think Griffiths coming off as well in that Newcastle game, which we lost, and of course, like it handed victory to the wooden spoon, which we haven't talked about. I just had to get that little nudge in there. It presents a different scenario. I think if those two are in there, Noon and Griffiths in particular, then 2-0 City. If they're not, and we're really starting to get to the bottom barrels of our squad depth, starting to get like our 18th, 19th, 20th players in terms of our depth roster is concerned, I think then we start looking at potentially it going to like a 1-1 draw and extra time again. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see once these 2 lineups are announced and the squads actually come together, how both teams are looking. I think Aloni mentioned a couple of times there Jovanovic. I think he's still out with calf strain, so that potentially brings in the likes of McGinn or Milligan to play at the back or whoever else. So I think both sides have injury clouds hanging over their side that potentially if they can get them fit and up and ready to go, it may change the dynamic. But I'll go with 2-0 City, assuming that everyone's fit and available to go.
Yeah, well, I made a couple of predictions last week. Both of them were very wrong, but I'll give it another crack. I'm going to say it'll be a 1-1 draw. it'll go to penalties, and Melbourne City will win on penalties. That's my take. But boys, I tell you what, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to this game. It's gonna be a big one. Alani, thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for
Thank
jumping
you.
on the reserve team. Thanks for making your debut.
No,
All
cheers.
the best, and enjoy
Thank
the
you.
game, mate.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the game yourself.
Thank you. And Sean, of course, mate, enjoy the game as well. You're going to stick around after this. We do have more reserve team podcasts coming up right after this break. Welcome back, Sean. Thanks again for jumping on as our Melbourne City representative for the preview. Big shout out to, and a big thank you as well to Aloni as well for jumping on and being our Macarthur FC representative and making his debut on the reserve team podcast. Mate, I think now that we've finished the preview, I can take my unbiased approach off and just say I'm very nervous from a Melbourne City point of view. Hopefully they get the job done. The big talking point for this game, though, is the fact that it has been moved from Melbourne to Sydney. Initially, it was announced that the game was still going to be in Melbourne, but there was going to be no crowds. A couple of hours later, we heard that was not going to be the case, that the whole game was getting shifted to Sydney. How do you feel about it? We spoke a little bit about it as part of the preview and how that sort of changes things, but what are your thoughts on the shift?
Look, I'm frustrated, to be completely honest. Try and be positive about this stuff, and like I've been a menace all day on Twitter, so I'm sure people have been seeing if they follow me or have been checking out my mentions. I've been a bit of a pain in the ass to everybody that's arguing the different point. I think the challenge for this is the Melbourne City earned the right to a home final. Like they earned that based on their seasonal performance, and then you add on top of that last season the Victorian clubs with the difficulty they had getting into the New South Wales like lockdown hub, if we're going to call it that, for both the final of the season and the final series itself. They met everybody halfway, and those 3 failed attempts to try and get out of the state were really those clubs trying to do the right thing and make sure that the season went ahead. Just as we've given credit to Wellington all throughout this season about how they've like moved heaven and earth to really make sure that the season goes ahead without a hitch. The challenge is now that there was an opportunity to get a crowd there that fell through. I think Melbourne City's preference was that they would host at a neutral venue, at a behind closed doors venue or a neutral venue within the state itself, because there's likely going to be Melbourne City fans that are in regional Victoria. You and I can't because we're from metropolitan Melbourne, but that's their right as the club that earned that opportunity to decide where that final gets hosted. And the challenge is at the moment, the APL, Australian Professional Leagues, they've got a tough job, but they don't have accountability that comes via fan engagement with social media. They don't have a Twitter account or a Facebook page or anything like that where they announce this news. All that burden falls on the clubs to try and push everything through and get everything going. And the challenge for me, or my biggest frustration, is that there's no acknowledgement that effectively the season's null and void almost from Melbourne City's perspective, because the advantages that they earned throughout the course of the season, well, yes, they won the Premier's Plate, and that should be applauded. Heading into the final series, they should have been able to have either a home field advantage or at least parity with Macarthur. If this was being played at a neutral venue outside of Sydney, then yeah, they've both got to travel for it. Both teams are effectively on a level playing field. At the moment, even though Macarthur are playing away from home, Kogarah or Jubilee or whatever we call it, Net Strata Jubilee isn't their home ground. It's still... they're going to wake up in their own beds. They're going to travel to the game as though they're traveling to a game within Sydney. For some of them, that ground may even be closer to their home field in Campbelltown. For a lot of them, those additional inputs is going to be treated like a home match or like a Sydney derby fixture. And there's an advantage that comes with that. We don't know what Melbourne City's travel arrangements are going to be, if they're going to go up and stay the night before or the night of, or they're going to try and fly in and out on the same day. But they're going to be in quarantine throughout the course of that day. That travel period does have an additional impact on players. We know that because so much money and funding goes into try and, get elite level teams to perform as well away from home as they do at home. So yeah, that's where my frustration comes from. There is no decision that drives this as being anything other than the APL trying to get as much revenue as possible. The COVID situation is actually worse at the moment in New South Wales than it is in Victoria. They're just not in a formal lockdown due to differences in state government. There's potential that other states like South Australia, Victoria, Queensland may start closing their borders to Sydney as well, given that they do have unidentified clusters within that region. So the COVID excuse goes out the window. The fairness excuse goes out the window because Macarthur will be playing a game in Sydney that they should rightfully be playing away from home. And effectively, we've taken away any advantage that Melbourne City has. Melbourne City will still do it, and they'll do it the hard way because that's what they've done for the last 2 seasons. And I still back them to do well in this game and hopefully get through. But the frustration comes from there's just no accountability with these decisions. There's no clarity on any of this. The statement that was released by the APL highlighted that it should be at a neutral venue to allow both teams to go in, but in reality we know that it's not a neutral venue. It's a big advantage that Macarthur now has heading into this contest, and a big disadvantage now that Melbourne City has to overcome. And if we're in this scenario 5 days from now going into a grand final, are they going to then move that away? If Melbourne City earns the right to host a grand final but they can only get 5,000 fans at it pending Victorian restrictions, does that mean they take it away again and we end up playing another semi-final away from home that none of us fans who've been there supporting all throughout the year get to go and see? So an incredibly frustrating day, and I'm sorry I've ranted and not let you jump in with any portions, but what were some of your thoughts and feelings once it was announced?
Well, I'll just chime in quickly because this is the reserve team podcast. It's not the Brandon Sean City fans having a whinge podcast. It's just unfortunate, obviously as a City fan, it kind of sucks. You win the Premier's Plate and then you lose 3 key players, as we mentioned, to the Socceroos, Socceroos international duty. You go, well, that sucks. And then you have a home semi-final that that then gets shifted as well. You go, well, that sucks. But just from a fan point of view, it's unfortunate that we can't go to the game. We were at the Premier's Plate game and it was fantastic. We didn't get the opportunity last year to go to a home semi-final that Melbourne City were meant to have. So it's just I'm just bummed. And
our first ever grand final, we didn't have that opportunity either, even as away fans. And I think that's where the frustration comes in for it. I don't blame Australian professional leagues for COVID. I don't at all in any stretch. And I know that they're in a very difficult scenario and situation where they're trying to get this done, but it just it doesn't feel like there were a lot of efforts made to really try and get the game in a regional Victorian location or to get it to a neutral venue. I feel like the default is always, well, we'll just do it in Sydney. And that I think frustrates not just even the City fans. I haven't seen that many people that are contrarian to this opinion. There's been a couple of people on Twitter that I've maybe bitten back at for their kind of takes on the whole situation and scenario. But, I think any fan would be frustrated and probably feel aggrieved if the decisions were to go their opposite way. And we might even see that further if Adelaide and Sydney get themselves in a scenario where they can't host it. So it's a tough situation for all. I understand and acknowledge the difficulty that the APL's put in. But again, the best thing you can do is just be clear and transparent about what's driving this decision-making process and don't present something as being a neutral solution if it's not. And I don't think this one is. But yeah, you're 100% right. This isn't our podcast. This isn't our forum. But yeah, just giving my perspective from how everything played out and shook out today.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we acknowledge our bias. You and I are both Melbourne City fans. For people listening in, hit us up in the comments below. What do you think? Do you think it's fair? Do you think we're just, reading too much into it and we should get over it? Let us know. Chime in. Let us know what you think about the decision as well and what alternative ones you think they should have made. But Sean, there's one other quick topic that I want to get your thoughts on before we wrap up this episode as well. We heard this week, it was confirmed today, that Alan Stuggich is quitting as the manager of the Central Coast Mariners, which is massive news. They were so good this season, and he's out. What is your reaction to that?
Yeah, so the Mariners, there's a bit of layers to that story, and we don't know all the details to be transparent with everybody, but we do know that the Central Coast Stadium management rights are up in the next few weeks, and a lot of that is actually going to have to do with how feasible the Mariners are staying in the Gosford region. One of the big things that came up earlier in the year when people spoke about potential buyers, and Mike Charlesworth, their owner, has been trying to sell the Mariners for as long as he's pretty much owned them, the last 4 or 5 years. And that has been some of the reason why they've had so many on-field and off-field struggles. But it doesn't bode well for how those cancel discussions are going to go relating to the owning and operation of that stadium, and what that may mean for the Mariners playing out of arguably one of the most picturesque venues in world football. And then at the same time, there's so many other clubs around the league that are looking for coaches now. Western United, we know Melbourne Victory are going through a state of flux with their kind of adjustment to bringing in Tony Popovich. We know there's going to be other teams on the lookout for managers potentially as well, and there is also potential for off-season management movement between those clubs. And this may be one of those scenarios where someone who has overperformed with limited resources is perhaps looking at opportunities at other clubs that may have greater resources available to them. So yeah, it's a damn shame for the Mariners because they've been, regardless of what the A-League might tell you, Macarthur isn't the fairy tale this season. It has been the Mariners, and I think everybody acknowledges that, even Macarthur fans. But yeah, they're now losing arguably the catalyst for their turnaround, which is their coaching team. Shout out to Nal Ararate. I probably butchered that pronunciation, but he's Stadrich's long-time assistant, who's also done a wonderful job. But then they're also potentially losing Daddy De Silva to MacArthur, who are recruiting quite heavily. They've also lost Kuol, who we know is heading over to Germany. There's potential that Ruan Tonyuk may be fielding offers from overseas and international clubs as well. So, yeah, it's tough being a Mariners fan, but I have faith in them to bounce back, and I think there'll be a lot of talented young NPL and Australian coaches that are really looking at that opportunity as having a great squad to work with that potentially they can try and push on to the next level next season.
Well, Jack Lisby is another name that I've seen linked to a departure. I've seen, again, just on Twitter or rumours going around that he might be headed to Perth as well. So I think it's just so unfortunate for the Mariners. You know, prior to this season, they missed the finals in 6 consecutive years. They finished last 3 seasons in a row as well. So it seemed, you know, this year that they'd finally turned a corner, that they were trending in the right direction. And then to lose the manager with some of these players that you've already mentioned just before, who were already departing as well. Yeah, I've got, man, I don't want to say that I fear for them, but, you know, it's... We've transitioned in the space of a week from the future is bright for the Mariners to not the complete opposite, but it's now the opposite. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely like they took 1 step forward, but now another 2 steps back. It's like they can't catch a break at the moment. And that's not to be a criticism of the coach or whatever else. I'm sure it's an incredibly challenging role. And I'm sure if they're not getting the backing that they want and that there's other off-field things going on, like we mentioned earlier on in the season, there was like a touch rugby tournament that took precedent over the Mariners training on their own facilities. Like, you know, if they're feeling that they're not going to get that prioritisation or support from the local council or the local footballing body, then yeah, it's a real challenge. It's a no. There aren't any villains in this particular situation, but like the hope is that the Mariners can get a stable owner in there as soon as possible and really get them back to the glory days, because seeing those crowds of 10,000 people back in Central Coast Stadium again to support the Mariners, seeing a smaller version of the brass band this past weekend was fantastic as well. The club, I think, deserves that support, and I think the local community in terms of the team as well deserves a high-performing and functioning unit.
Yeah, and fingers crossed whoever is in charge for the Mariners next year does a good job. Hopefully the club's situation can stabilise a bit and they can continue their good run of form. But, mate, that pretty much brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for joining me. Thanks as well to all of our team representatives for joining us. Our MacArthur fan, Aloni, our Adelaide United fan, Rose, our Sydney FC fan, Michelle, and, of course, Sean, you as our city representative. Thanks for jumping on the podcast, everyone. Mate, it's going to be a big weekend of semi-final action. 2 huge games. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. Enjoy your weekend of football, mate, and thanks for jumping on the show. Yeah,
and again, we'll be trying to do some of our alternative commentary this weekend, so people should go and check us out at Reserve Team AU over on Twitter, and of course our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/The Reserve Team, to watch along with us. It was a lot of fun last weekend, and hopefully it is again this week as well. But yeah, I hope you enjoy the game and that your team wins, because it's my team also.
Definitely, mate. We're both rooting for this. Yeah, I'm with you. But everyone, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit us up on socials, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, as Sean mentioned as well. And don't forget as well to head to thereserveteam.com.au, your home of all things Australian and New Zealand football. Thank you very much for listening to this week's episode of the Reserve Team podcast. We'll see you next week.